Hey guys, what's going on? Thanks for joining me today. This is Spiguyver Backpacking. I'm Spiguyver, and today we're going to be taking a look at this stove. This is the Toaks Titanium Siphon stove. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be doing a boil test on this. We're going to be using the three different pots that I use, the Toaks 700 light, the Toaks 550 light, and a Foster's pot that's capable of holding about 12 ounces. As the protocols go, we're going to be using 12 ounces of water and 1 ounce of fuel for each of the burns. We're going to measure boil time and then burnout time. So this is the Toaks Siphon stove. It is a double walled. It's got jets on the inside of the ring there. Nice and light. It is 24 grams. So a nice light package right here. And unlike some of the lighter ones, this one is much more robust. It's made out of titanium and really can withstand a lot. Now the one difference with this one than some of the other stoves out and some of the other stoves we will be testing is that this is actually not necessarily considered a stove. This would be considered a burner because you cannot set a pot directly on top of it. By setting a pot directly on it, you're going to put out the flames. So it requires a pot stand. Now, if you're using the hardware cloth with the bigger mesh like I'm using, 5 is about correct to give it that 1 inch sweet spot. So that's what we'll be using for this round of tests. So this is the Toaks Siphon Titanium Alcohol Stove. So this is what we're going to be testing out. Why don't we get into it? Let's go. Okay, so we've just about got everything set up here. I've got the thermometer, temperature scale set up, ready to go. It's 62 degrees in here right now. We'll see what the water temperature is, but we've got this set up, ready to go. I'm gonna measure out the 1 ounce of fuel and check that I have the 0.75 for the weight. There's 7.4. Add a couple more drops. There's 0.75. And so that 1 ounce will go into the stove. Set that off to the side. Now I'm using a 5 for the mesh for the pot stand, and that will give the 1 inch, which is about the sweet spot for the burn pattern. So we're going to be using the 700 to start with, then we'll use the 550, then we'll use the Foster's pot. So let's get this thing going. Starting temperature is 61 degrees. Here we go. All right, let's get this thing lit up. It's lit. We'll get the pot on. Timer started. There we go. We'll come back when it's approaching a boil. So here we are passing 200 degrees, quickly approaching the boil. I can see the bubbles inside of the pot, which would normally indicate a boil, but we're waiting for that 209. There we are at 522. 522 for a boil with the Toaks Titanium Siphon stove. Let's see how long it takes before we get to a burnout. Here we are at 10:34 and it keeps dropping below. The fuel's about to burn out and the fuel just completely burned out right there. So we're gonna call that 10:45 and that should be about what we're calling burnout. It's 10:45. 10:53 is where it dropped below the 209. Okay, for the next test, we have the Toaks Titanium Siphon, the 550, and we've got it set up, ready to go. refilled with 12 fluid ounces. Currently sitting at 61 degrees, same as the last one. We've got the 1 fluid ounce in there, so let's go ahead and fire it up. Pot goes on top. Timer is started. Well, let's see how long this one takes to come to a boil. So we just passed 200 degrees. I will say this is a much louder stove than a lot of the other alcohol stoves I have, but it is performing pretty well. Just a few more degrees to go. .209 at 5:35. 5 minutes, 35 seconds with the 550. We'll keep this going and find out what the burnout time is. Here we are at 10 minutes, 40 seconds. The flames are dying, going out, and the flames are now out at 10:48. Note the water's still holding a little bit, but we're gonna call it 10:48 because flames are completely out. Okay, for the last of the boil tests with the Toaks Titanium Siphon, we have the Foster's pot. Again, starting water temperature is 61 degrees. We've got 1 fluid ounce in the stove. Let's start it. Pot goes on. Start the timer, and we'll come back when we get to a boil. Okay, so we've just passed 200 degrees. The smaller diameter does seem to be having a little bit of an impact on this. And we can see water coming out of the top, but we haven't hit 209 degrees yet, so we're not going to call it a full boil quite yet. There we go, 6 minutes on the dot for a rolling boil. I'm going to go ahead and pull the top off so that we don't keep spilling a bunch of water out of there, and we're going to let this thing keep going and find out what burnout is on it. So we're at 10:13 and the flames are dying down, starting to come off of a rolling boil. Still see a few bubbles in there, but mostly not. There at 10:23, we hit 208 degrees, and flames are just about out. And flames are now out. So 10:23 for a burnout with this one. Okay guys, so we just did the test. We were testing out this Toaks Titanium Siphon. Little burner there, needed a pot stand. We got all 3 of these pots on there, the 700, the 550, and the Foster's pot. And unlike the previous stove that we tested, this one did show that the wider diameter of the 700 proved to be effective in reducing the boil time. So the boil times were 5 minutes and 22 seconds on the 700, 5 minutes and 35 seconds on the 550, and 6 minutes flat on the Foster's pot. Now, I will say, I think the Foster's pot probably would have come in a little bit sooner had I had the stove centered under it the whole time. It was about 4 minutes in, maybe 5 minutes in, before I realized that the stove was not centered and some of the flames were going up the backside rather than staying underneath. I could redo this at another point, but I think the results kind of speak for themselves. 12, 13 seconds quicker on the 700, and then when you get all the way down to the Foster's pot, it was longer. Now, the burnout time for each of these, we were 10:45, 10:48, and then 10:23. So for some reason, when the Foster's pot was going, it actually shortened the time, which is kind of interesting. I did not expect that. All of them measured out with exactly the same amount of fuel, so they should have burned about the same amount of time. But it was a little inconsistent when it got to this third pot. But with these ones both being within 3 seconds of each other, I think you can expect about a 10.5 to a 10:45 burn time with 1 ounce of fuel using the Titanium Siphon. And you can expect a boil time somewhere in the 5.5 minute range. Now, if you're using a really small pot, such as the Foster's pot, you may be looking at 6 minutes, but you'll get it done with 1 ounce of fuel, no problem. Guys, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something from this one. We'll keep doing more tests. Keep coming back, checking it out. Make sure you subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any of these. Thanks. I will see you guys down the trail.